Welcome back, guys. This is Snook, and we are here for another week in executive briefing on Smarter B2B. I'm talking about part two, business model and strategy reengineering workshop. Last week, we covered insights and research and how we discover these new areas where we can optimize reliability in our customer experience, but also our business strategy and how that fits into our business model. But now we're going to dive into the strategy itself, how we set that strategy. And then next week, we'll finish off this short mini series with execution and putting it all together. So without further ado, let's just do a quick level set on where things are as we come to the week. I know that some of the news has died down as it relates to, COVID-19 and the scale of the flattening of the curve as we move into quote unquote reopening on a multiple state basis over here in the US. Globally, you've seen other countries reopen, but from what the data says, and again, I care about the data and the narrative, but because both matter, because one is dealing with the qualitative consciousness of the mass society and your customers and your vendors and your competitors, and then the other is just dealing with facts and how big or bad things are moving and how fast. And so again, we hit a little bit over 1 million active cases, maintaining that this week. Growth rates have slowed a little bit, but again, if we look like other countries around the world have reopened and seen resurgences of spikes, we could probably anticipate that here. So I think this is just the beginning. Nonetheless, regardless of whether it's the beginning or the end of this phase or whether the wave 2 is bigger, hopefully by now you've realized that you need a completely new strategy and that business as usual no longer exists. So before we get started, let's just do a quick shout out and thank you to Emerged, our fearless leader and sponsor who makes these things available to you for free. Please check out emerge.com, especially if you're looking for efficient new ways to do target-like level rifle shot relationship building with qualified prospects in B2B businesses that have long sales cycles and high LTV, but don't want to spend a lot of money on infrastructure or waste or sunk cost. Maybe you're sales heavy and marketing light on internal resources, and you just need qualified conversations at scale and better SQL. So check out the guys at Emerge. Mention this webinar or Decisions 2020, which started this whole thing, and they'll do a rapid assessment of mutual fit and a customized list of 2,000 unique prospects to you before you even talk about any kind of contracting or anything like that. So check that out. Get in touch with Cameron. And again, big thanks to Emerge for making these possible. A little bit about me and the logistics, and we'll dive right in. I'm the co-author of Digital Sense and been an entrepreneur and business executive for over 20 years. You can chat with me through the chat, or you can just email me. And again, if you have any questions for Cameron or any of the team over at Emerge, you can see that email right here. So I'll get out of the way for that. And let's get right in. So I love this meme, right? Because this is the question that many of us have asked ourselves. Maybe you've yelled this at your team. Maybe your boss is yelling at you. I'm not sure what lens you're coming through, but when we speak frankly, these are the things that are on people's minds right now. So last week we talked about the EMF and the framework that we talked about in Digital Sense and how there's 3 layers and 2 loops, designed to not only discover but also design and then ultimately deploy, which we'll get into next week. Innovations around putting the customer in the center of all decision making, putting the customer in the center of your business, and having everything else from resourcing capabilities to the product suite, to the feature set, and to ultimately the go-to-market strategy center around that new reality and to provide you the ultimate and only remaining competitive advantage, because we're biased and we believe that the data shows this, but if you think through your own experience, there isn't really an industry left today, for the most part, that doesn't have a commoditized offering at some level. Most people that make stuff, that thing can be made almost anywhere for right around the same price and right around the same quality. So brand means more than ever. And brand is now a relationship more than ever, not just a loyalty or a commitment. It is truly a relationship. It's an ever-breathing, ever-dynamic, ever-shifting, ever-promiscuous in some case thing with our customer set and with our prospects. And so in B2B, that's no different, because in B2B, we are part of a chain that ultimately enables some consumer end function. We are the enablers or the enablement to our customer, which ultimately allows someone down their chain to deliver an end user. And if that end user goes away, or if that end user is unemployed and can no longer afford, or if that end user starts to hoard capital because of crisis and fear, if that end user ends up being bankrupt, or any number of other things, or just changing completely their core values of how they consume, then the ripple effects and the knock-on effects will ultimately end up on our front door sooner rather than later. So we mentioned the great work done by Osterwalder and his team last week over Strategizer. I use this graphic because there's no reason to create a new one when they've done such a good job. A lot of you may use Lean Canvas if you're early stage. Maybe if you're running Agile sprints or if you're running Agile innovation groups or things like that, you've come across business model generation and you've seen this framework or this canvas before. Again, today what we're going to be talking about is how to plug in the EMF framework and the vision layer, which is specifically around strategy, so that it aligns to that insights layer we spoke of last week, and it ultimately sets you up with a very concrete 12-month roadmap that you can execute against when we get into the success layer next week. So we're going to be talking about and looking at things like key activities, key resources, cost centers, and ultimately those channels and those customer relationships as they move across the journey of becoming your customer or driving towards loyalty or leaving. So we'll spend most of the time, pardon me, on this slide today. When you think about the three areas that we're going to talk about today, the three buckets, so to speak, of this layer within the EMF, we're really talking about designing a strategy that aligns with the insights we gained around customer need last week, macro forces that are outside of our business but that impact our business, and ultimately what the competitive set is doing better than us, weaker than us, where they're vulnerable, where there's a gap in the market, where there's a need that no one else is filling, that we are predisposed to step right into. So as we come up to the second layer, the vision layer, and we start to really think about strategy, I know there's 3-year plans and 5-year plans, and pretty much all of those are out the window as of 3 months ago. And you may be thinking about your 3 to 5 year plan, but for most of you, you're in triage moment. You know that in 2 years, 3 years, we're going to be on the other side of this and at least understand, the new rules of the road, the new certainties and uncertainties, have a handle on it. And so really right now it's about what does my adjusted rest of 2020 and through 2021 strategy look like? So call that a 12 to 18 month plan that ultimately allows you to set up and step into a new 3 to 5 year plan with a new 12 month beginning in late 21. So the questions that we want to answer here and that we're going to address here that we need to kind of level set against before we move on to the success layer is 3 things. Is there alignment between our business goals? So when you talk about business goals up here, is there alignment between the top 3 business goals that we have moving forward from today through the end of the year through 2021? Whether that is, maintain margin, whether that is prevent churn below 20% of our portfolio of customers, whatever those new goals are, do they align with the new customer needs in priority that we discovered in last week's workshop when we were dealing with the insights layer? If they don't, and I'll give you a quick example in a second that has nothing to do with COVID, but that came from the real world. If they don't, then we really don't have a strategy, right? What we have is we have a mission that we're on, and it's going to violate core needs that our customers on, and ultimately those paths are going to do this. And so in order for us to really move forward to executing anything with confidence, we have to understand our customer needs and where they are as they sit today, looking out through the next 18 months, and then our alignment of our goals, what we need to do to keep our business thriving, surviving, or ride this out. Those goals have to align and not violate those customer needs. So that's number one. We'll start there. Quick example of this would be a couple years ago, I was visiting with some of the senior team at Michael Kors, and I was talking with the chief digital officer at a conference, and we were having lunch, and he was discussing how one of the mistakes they had made when they had optimized everything from digital transformation, and they had done some really important things and some really cool things, but one of the mistakes that he made that he said in hindsight they didn't realize until later was what he called attribution of the sale. Where did they attribute the sale? And so the example that he gave was because of the world of retail and e-commerce kind of rapidly forging into both channel and also omni-channel, they had attributed revenues on anything that came through the website. They had attributed that sale to the e-commerce channel. Now, that seems to make sense conceptually. The challenge is that part of the optionality they provided, like many stores do today, was that you could either buy it online and have it shipped, or you could buy it online and pick it up at a store near you, or you could buy it online and then you could return it at a store near you. Now, this is not something that is novel today. Most retailers with any kind of e-com presence have enabled similar things. But the problem they had with that is they had literally just shut down and closed 102 stores. And the reasoning for that was when the C-suite, when the rest of the C-suite looked at the P&Ls and looked at the data, because attribution for all online sales was given to the e-commerce channel, what they didn't take into effect was how much weight was given to e-com sales that then were picked up in a store. And why that mattered was because where the cost load of that sale was at the retail store. It was not on purely the e-com channel. Sure, you had ad spend, sure you had conversion rate, and you had those kind of cogs. But what they did not have in their model was an attribution of labor and packing and picking and essentially the pickup process. And because of that, what happened was their numbers weren't true. Their numbers were skewed. And so what they didn't realize was they shut down 102 stores because the stores were unprofitable and e-com was killing it. And about 60% of those stores, part of why the e-com was working so well is because customers had a big demand to go pick up at certain locations. And so when they shut those stores down, not only did they kill off the e-commerce functionality, but they violated the customer need and violated the customer experience in the name of optimizing margin. And had they had a weighted average or an attribution of the point of sale is the channel, but the attribution of the sale goes to where the cost load is incurred, then they would have been able to make a wiser decision in the C-suite. So again, why alignment matters and why these goals of margin improvement or optimization or cost cutting or whatever those goals are going to be, why they have to align and be tested against that customer need and that data set that tells me where the customer load is. So that's an example of alignment. Where are you going to get your competitive advantage? Now, in a time of crisis or contraction or things like that, temporary or extended, obviously resources, which is the scope part of things over here. So scope, boom, my hand went off screen. So scope is basically, what are my resources, my capital, my people, my infrastructure over the next 12 months, right? I got to calibrate, and that's what we'll get about in a second here. I got to calibrate everything that I'm going to decide to this scope. And so before I get there, I've got to understand across my customer journey. So in B2B, we know that roughly 60 to 67%, according to different data sets, of the buyer's journey and the buyer's decision is made before they pick up the phone and talk to one of our salespeople. So no matter how sophisticated your online and digital B2B strategy content is, the people that solve the problem like you, your competitors, are investing money along that customer journey of those various touch points to educate, inform, discern these prospects. And ultimately, they're trying to win that business as well. And so you have all these touch points across the journey that start with, I'm aware that I have this need and I need to fill it, or my boss just told me we need to fill it. And then I begin to consider and do research and early stage research. I start to educate and inform myself on the different ways I can attack and solve this need. I look at case studies. And so every one of these touch points, sometimes they're touching in one of your things. Maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's a white report, maybe it's, an email newsletter, whatever it is, they're starting to opt into various people at these different touch points. They're starting on Google, or they're starting somewhere else where they're searching through LinkedIn or whatever their portal is. They're starting to go through industry trade magazines or digital, networks that are organizations. And they're starting to say, hey, who solves this problem? Who do we know in network that solves this problem? The awareness phase. So these different touch points are all critical. And you're going to have either no appearance there, or you're going to be a dominant appearance there. And when you're setting your strategy, the overwhelming part can a lot of times be looking at everything you don't have. Well, we don't have a strong digital presence. We don't have anybody doing content. All of our competitors are way ahead of us here. But what your discipline as you're going through this EMF and you're trying to think about it is not to focus on where you're weak. It's to focus on where are you strong? Where in your, call it a funnel or whatever you want to relate it to, where in your loop of customer journey are you the most strong? And where if you invest some or all of your money over the next 12 months into that touch point, even if you don't increase the the funnel that's getting to that touch point, if you just increase your conversion at that touch point by 5 to 10% over your competitor set because you were dominant there and they are not, this is where you can gain strategic advantage. So if it's the front end of the funnel that's really strong, well then, can you make it stronger? Or is it time to invest in maybe a second or third layer piece of that journey to go steal market share, to go steal awareness, to go steal loyalty or trust, more importantly than loyalty at that stage, from prospects that otherwise might consider your competitor, because you can now invest in that touch point, and that's going to ultimately give you a larger delta at the end. The point here is there's always spillover to catch from somebody else. Years ago, we owned a hybrid publishing company in the portfolio, and it was a small little company. Did $400,000 its first year profitable. Did about $850,000 first 5 months of the second year before we exited the position. And the way that we built our strategy was we knew we didn't have marketing dollars. We knew we didn't have, the cutting edge website. We knew we didn't have a lot of the things that certainly the big publishers had or the high volume self-publishers had. But what we also knew is we had a very tight focus on our customer who was a business book author or a business leader. And we also knew that roughly at that time, this was in early 2010, late 09, because of the move to digital and because of the economics breaking in publisher advances and that whole business model, a lot of quality, what was called mid-list authors, were not getting book deals with advances. And so they were kind of sitting there going back to the Random Houses of the world or the big shops, the HarperCollins of the world, and they were submitting proposals, or their book agent was, and they weren't getting offers anymore with reasonable advances. It was down to $4,000 to $20,000, and that was basically giving away 85% of the future earning potential on that, and you still had to spend 40 or 50 out of your own pocket to build the website and build the marketing plan yourself. And so it didn't economically make sense for either side. And yet the talent, the book writing, the capabilities, the need of people sharing good business content hadn't gone down. If anything, it had increased. But the only other option at that point was the high volume self-publishing shops that took anybody with $1 and a dream and turned them into a published author. And so coming from this world where you had huge big publishers that were turning out anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 rejections a month and had all the front end of the funnel because they were dominant. They were the known entities. They were the New York publishers. And then the self-publishers that had all the front end of the funnel of people that were curious about writing a book and doing it on the cheap or whatever. They had all the front end lead gen for the kind of DIY or the vanity group. And meanwhile, our customer didn't have a solution. And so instead of going out and trying to message against all that, we just sat underneath that spillover. Literally found ways strategically to just be at that touch point of rejection. And so, again, there's ways to calibrate where you invest in your touch point and where you invest in your communication and where you can get in front of this customer so that as they become educated and that 67% of the workload is done, if you're not able to invest in all that content, you're literally able to step in right here and win the relationship and hijack them at the point of literally sorting down to the final 2 or 3 without the sunk cost that your competitors did. Now, it's going to happen to you as well because you're going to educate customers that ultimately go somewhere else. But the point is that as long as the percentages are in your favor, in B2B, you can win, right? Because the LTVs are long and the sales cycles and the profits are high. So that's where we're talking about setting up that competitive advantage. Map it to the goals, look at the touch points, and realize you can't invest in everything. Where can you get the most delta by investing what you do have? And within that calibrated scope of resources, bandwidth constraints, new marketing budget cut realities, new sales team cut realities, whatever that new scope is post COVID-19, calibrate that to the touch point that you have the most impact on, and that's how you build a winning strategy. So that's our kind of short workshop for the week. Things to think about. Feel free to email me. Resources for you to follow up. You certainly can check out Business Model Generation, great book by Osterwalder and Pignor. Travis Wright and I wrote Digital Sense. If you haven't read it yet, encourage you to. Thank you to Emerged. Anybody who's not following the data in real time, good site is the one I shared earlier for COVID. And again, this is Smarter B2B, and I'm Chris Snook, your host. See you next time.